Lythane was the kind of valley where people lowered their voices when the wind turned cold. They didn't say the Vampire King's name unless they had to, and even then they said it like a warning, not a word. Vesperhold, his ruined keep in the mountains, was a dark shape in every story parents told to make children come inside before dusk. They said King Alaric drank courage the way men drank ale. They said birds went silent over his land. They said the river dulled near his shadow. And if anyone questioned the tales, the village answered with fear disguised as certainty. "Don't defend monsters," the merchants would mutter. "You'll bring his eye upon us," the elders warned, tracing old signs in the air. Charlotte grew up hearing all of it. She was the miller's daughter, quiet-eyed, narrow-shouldered, and soft in a world that preferred sharpness. She spoke, but rarely. Words often stalled in her throat, as if her voice didn't want to fight its way into noise. When she was small, other children called her hush and laughed when she didn't answer fast enough. When she got older, they learned to mock her silence in gentler, crueler ways, speaking too loudly at her, or copying her careful movements like a joke. Charlotte didn't argue. It wasn't weakness. She simply felt too much to waste herself on proving anything. But there was one kind of silence she couldn't bear: when someone was suffering, and everyone pretended not to see. That autumn, sickness crept through the farms at the valley's edge. Not a dramatic plague, not the sort of thing ballads were written about, just lingering fevers, coughing that stole sleep, and a heaviness that turned strong people into shadows. The apothecary ran out of what little he had. The priest prayed faithfully, but prayer alone didn't cool a child's burning forehead. One evening Charlotte carried flour to old Marek's cottage. Marek had once been a soldier. Now he was only a man with a limp and a cough that never truly left. He sat on his doorstep staring at his hands, like he'd forgotten what they were for. "Charlotte," he rasped when he saw her. "You shouldn't." She set the flour down and sat beside him without asking. After a long breath he whispered, "It's worse. I can't keep the fire going." His voice cracked with pride. "I don't want to die in bed. Not like an old candle." Charlotte watched his trembling fingers and the grayness around his mouth. She offered him honey and a small packet of dried herbs she'd begged from the apothecary. Marek's eyes filled with tired honesty. "It's not enough." Charlotte's gaze drifted to the mountains where the last light caught the broken towers of Vesperhold. She knew the stories. She knew what people claimed the Vampire King would do to anyone who crossed into his land. But she also remembered strange mercies that never had an owner. A winter when wolves circled the village and then vanished overnight, leaving tracks that led away toward the mountains, like something had guided them back into the forest. A peddler who broke his leg on the ridge road and later limped into town swearing he'd woken beside a fire with his leg expertly bound and money tucked into his coat, yet insisting no one had been there. A spring flood that threatened the low fields, then eased as if a patient hand had pressed the river's temper down. People called it luck. Or saints. Or coincidence. Charlotte only remembered. That night she lay awake, picturing Marek's helpless hands, children coughing into blankets, her mother trying not to look worried. And always, like a dark star in the distance, she pictured Vesperhold, silent and watching. Before dawn she rose, wrapped herself in her cloak, and took the old path into the trees. She carried no weapon. Only a small basket with bread, a tin cup, and a folded note, simple words written and rewritten until the paper grew soft. My name is Charlotte. People here are sick. We have no medicine left. If you have any mercy, please help. If you do not, I will leave and never return. I will not tell anyone I came." She signed it because she couldn't bear to ask for mercy without offering her own honesty in return. By midday she reached the fallen stones of Vesperhold. The keep wasn't roaring with menace the way the tales insisted. It was simply old, broken towers softened by ivy, dark windows like empty eyes, a gate that hung open as if it had stopped trying to keep the world out. Charlotte's heart beat too loudly. A movement stirred in the archway, quiet, unhurried. A man stepped forward from shadow. Tall. Pale. Dressed in a coat the color of midnight. Black hair touched with silver at the temples. Eyes a deep red-brown, like garnet held to a flame. King Alaric. Charlotte couldn't speak at first. Her fear filled her mouth like ash. The Vampire King looked at her basket, then the note clenched in her hand. His face barely changed, but his gaze sharpened with a careful attention, as if he was listening for something beneath her silence. "You are alone," he said, voice low and even. Charlotte nodded. "You were not sent." She shook her head. For a moment the forest felt as if it was holding its breath. His eyes rested on her face, and Charlotte had the unsettling sense of being fully seen, not hunted, not judged, simply noticed. "Why do you not speak?" he asked. Not unkindly. Just curious, as if he were asking why the sky turned gold at evening. Charlotte forced words out in a whisper. "I do. Sometimes. Not much." His gaze softened almost imperceptibly. "Your note speaks for you." She held it out with trembling fingers. He took it carefully, as if it mattered. He read it once, then again, slower. When he finished, he folded it along the old creases and smoothed it with his thumb. "The sickness began after the late rains," he said. Charlotte nodded, relieved he understood without needing her to explain. He looked down the path toward the valley, and Charlotte saw something in his stillness that wasn't pride or cruelty. It was weariness, deep and old, as if he'd watched life from a distance for far too long. "You fear me," he said, not accusing. "Just stating a truth." "Yes," Charlotte whispered. Then, because she couldn't survive lies, she added, "But I came anyway." Something like grief touched his mouth. "Brave," he murmured. "Or desperate." He turned and walked back under the archway. He didn't command her to follow. He didn't warn her away. He simply moved as if her choice still belonged to her. After a heartbeat of hesitation, Charlotte stepped into Vesperhold. Inside, the air was cool and clean. Not a lair. Not a nightmare. Just old stone and quiet care. Candles burned steadily in wall niches. The faint scent of dried herbs hung in the corridors, so ordinary it nearly made her cry. He led her into a chamber that might once have been a library. Now it held bundles of plants drying from beams, bottles lined neatly on shelves, a kettle warming over coals. A place arranged by patient hands. "You make medicine," Charlotte breathed before she could stop herself. "I make what I can," Alaric said. "I learned long ago. When I still lived among people." The way he said lived among sounded like exile. Charlotte set her basket down, suddenly ashamed of the simple bread. He glanced at it. "Food," he said. "For me?" Charlotte nodded, cheeks warming. He looked at the loaf a long moment. Then he inclined his head in an old, formal gesture. "Thank you," he said. The words landed in Charlotte like warmth. No one had ever thanked her as if her fear, her effort, and her small gift mattered. He began selecting herbs with calm precision, asking quiet questions: how many were sick, what symptoms, how long it lasted. When Charlotte struggled to speak, he didn't interrupt. He waited. He let her pauses be part of the conversation, as if silence wasn't emptiness but space. At last he poured hot water over crushed leaves and roots. The scent rose bitter and clean. "This will ease fever," he said, setting bottles aside. "This for the lungs. And this, steeped overnight, for strength." Charlotte stared at the bundles as if they were impossible. "You would help us," she whispered. "I will not watch children struggle to breathe," he replied simply. Not heroic, just tired, as if he'd sworn long ago to refuse certain kinds of suffering. Charlotte swallowed. "Why don't you come with me?" "If they saw." "They would not see," he said softly. "Not yet. Perhaps not ever." Then, quieter still, "I am what they needed to fear. So they could tell themselves the darkness is over there." Charlotte understood then, his loneliness wasn't an accident. It was a role the world had pressed onto him, and he had worn it so others could feel safer, even if it cost him everything tender. Before she left, he brought her a cloak, thick wool, newly mended, fastened with a small silver clasp shaped like a leaf. "The nights are colder on the path," he said. "Take it." "I can't," Charlotte whispered. "It is unused," he said gently. "And you will use it." When her fingers brushed his as she took the medicine, she flinched at his cold skin. Alaric withdrew immediately, as if he'd touched a bruise. "I'm sorry," Charlotte whispered, ashamed. "Do not apologize," he said. "For what your body remembers from other people's stories." She left before sunset. When she looked back at the edge of the trees, he stood in the archway watching, still as carved stone. He didn't wave. He didn't call her name. He simply stayed there until the forest swallowed her path. Charlotte brought the medicine home. Her mother's fear rose fast, but Charlotte asked, quietly and firmly, to be trusted. That night they went to the apothecary. Charlotte didn't say Alaric. She didn't say vampire. She only said, from the mountain. The apothecary paled. Hesitated. Then he looked at a feverish child and let necessity outweigh terror. Days passed, and the village began to mend. Fevers broke softly, like dawn arriving after a long night. Coughs eased. Old Marek sat upright and managed a surprised, crooked smile. People called it fortune. They called it the saints. Some said the priest's prayers had finally reached the right ear. No one spoke of Vesperhold. No one asked why Charlotte wore a warm cloak clasped with a silver leaf even when the days were mild. But Charlotte noticed something. On the night the fevers truly broke, she woke to the sound of hooves outside the mill. She crept to the window and looked out. A rider sat on a dark horse at the edge of the yard, motionless, watching the lit windows, one by one, as if counting them, as if needing to know the lights stayed steady. Then he turned his horse and rode away without a sound. Charlotte stood with her palm against the cold glass long after he vanished. Soon the market returned. Not joyful, but alive. And with life came gossip. As Charlotte passed the fountain, she heard two women murmuring. "It's the miller's girl," one said. "Always staring at nothing. Probably listening for him," the other laughed softly. "Maybe she bargained. Maybe that's why the fever left." Charlotte kept walking, face calm, though the words lodged under her ribs like a thorn. That evening, the priest stopped her on the path. "People are talking," he said gently. "I did what I had to," Charlotte whispered. His eyes flicked toward the mountains. "Did he demand anything?" Charlotte shook her head. "Did he harm you?" She shook her head again, and something steady rose in her chest, warm and fierce. The priest studied her. "Then why does he live alone like that?" Charlotte looked down at her hands. "Maybe," she said softly, "because we decided what he was before we ever let him speak." The priest's expression softened, but fear still clung. "Be careful," he warned. "Kindness from the dark can confuse people." Charlotte almost smiled through the sting of tears. "Kindness is kindness," she murmured. "It doesn't belong to the light." That night Charlotte lay awake thinking of the rider watching her windows like they were stars. Before dawn she rose again, lantern in hand, and returned to Vesperhold. The path felt shorter now, as if fear had once stretched it and courage had quietly gathered it back. Alaric was in the herb chamber, grinding roots. He didn't look surprised to see her. "The fever is gone," Charlotte said. He set down the pestle and breathed as if he'd been holding something inside his ribs. "Good," he said. Charlotte stepped closer. "Thank you." His gaze lifted, and she saw something move behind his stillness, an emotion kept careful and contained. "You came," he said quietly, "when you could have stayed safe." "People think I bargained," Charlotte admitted. "They think you took something." "They will always think that," he said, not bitter, just resigned. "You didn't take," Charlotte said. "You gave." Alaric said nothing, but the silence between them felt different now, less like distance, more like trust being built carefully, plank by plank. "Does it hurt?" Charlotte asked, "to be feared for doing good?" He looked away as if the question was too intimate for someone who had lived too long without being asked it. "Not hurt," he said softly. "It is lonely." The word settled into the room like a small stone into deep water. Charlotte swallowed. "Then let someone know," she whispered. "Let me know. I won't bring others. I won't speak of you if you don't want me to." He turned back, and his eyes held something like surprise, hope, cautious as a wild animal. "You should not tie your life to mine," he said. "It will make your village watch you. It will make your future smaller." Charlotte's lips trembled. "My future is smaller if I can't choose kindness when it scares me." He studied her a long moment, then took a small bottle from a shelf. "This is not for sickness," he said, offering it without stepping too close. "It is for sleep. For nightmares. People's bodies remember fear even after they are well." Charlotte accepted it. After a pause he said, "You have good ears, Charlotte. Not for sound. For what people do not say." Charlotte's throat tightened. "They mocked my silence," she whispered, "but it's the only way I ever heard the truth." Something in Alaric softened fully then, not a dramatic change, just warmth sliding through the cracks of his restraint like dawn through shutters. Outside, somewhere in the ruined keep, a bird called. One clear note. Then another. Charlotte blinked hard, tears rising. Alaric turned his head toward the sound, faint puzzled sorrow in his eyes. "They have been quiet for years," he murmured. "Maybe," Charlotte whispered, wiping her cheek, "they were waiting for someone to listen differently." They sat across from each other with the lantern between them like a small hearth. Alaric returned to measuring herbs, preparing packets he might never be thanked for. Charlotte watched the calm rhythm of his hands and understood, goodness wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was simply the steady choice to mend what could be mended. When she finally stood to leave, he walked her to the archway. The sun was rising pale gold through the trees. "Will you be all right?" Charlotte asked. He tilted his head as if the question was unfamiliar. "I have been," he said. Then, after a pause like a door opening only a fraction, "Better, now." As Charlotte turned away, Alaric spoke her name once more. She looked back. He held out her original note, the one asking for mercy, folded neatly, creased from being handled more than once. "I kept it," he admitted, almost reluctantly. "To remind myself that someone still believes monsters can choose." Charlotte couldn't trust her voice. She only inclined her head, returning his old courtesy like a quiet echo. Then she walked down the mountain path toward the valley. Behind her, Vesperhold remained stone and shadow, and the Vampire King remained feared by the world below. His name would still be spoken like a warning. His kindness would still go unseen by most. Yet as Charlotte descended, the forest felt warmer, not from sunlight, but from something gentler. A robin sang from a branch as if it had always been allowed. And when Charlotte saw smoke rising from chimneys, steady, ordinary, alive, she understood with a calm certainty that settled into her bones. Sometimes the kindest hearts live behind the names people fear. And sometimes all it takes to begin changing a story is one person willing to listen, especially when everyone else only hears the legend.